Hi, I'm Larry Swanke, Director of Azure Services for Catapult Systems.
I'm Jay Douglas, Solution Architect, focusing on Azure technologies. If you have any questions, comments, or just want to talk about today's topic, click the button below and you can put time on our calendar right now to have a discussion. Welcome to the Azure Bootcamp. This week we're talking about Azure Active Directory. What is Azure Active Directory? We have the traditional on-premise Active Directory that most organizations and enterprises are using right now. Then came the cloud. We have, apps, systems, information. We have the SaaS components of Office 365 and Exchange and those types of things. We need identity against that. Here comes Active Directory in Azure, in the cloud, born in the cloud. It provides capabilities to sync information from your on-premise Active Directory to the cloud. Very specific. You don't need to sync passwords or any other type of sensitive information, but it allows you to kind of get that identity in the cloud. That provides many, many benefits, but most specifically, single sign-on. And that provides a single authentication experience across all your applications and all your resources, and even third-party resources with OpenID and SAML. We'll get into that a little bit. In addition to that, Azure Active Directory in the cloud provides self-service, whether you're creating accounts, resetting passwords, or all those types of, activities that sometimes involves IT. You can now do it self-service from the user in the cloud. Some facts about identity and access and those types of things you want to consider when thinking about Azure Active Directory. Typically, when attackers get into your network, into your infrastructure, they're there for 200 plus days. They're establishing extra backdoors. They're learning your network better than you know it. And they're all within your network with an assumed identity in a lot of cases. Most people don't have guest access, so they're authenticating and getting in your network, right? 63% of these breaches are due to credentials, whether it's spear phishing or phishing attempts or weak passwords or, the kind of quintessential kind of a sticky note with your password on it, on the desk. This is how people are getting in, right? $500 billion, for Fortune 1000 companies is, kind of the cost for cybersecurity incidences. And also those Fortune 1000 companies, when they do have a breach or they do have an issue with someone compromising credentials, it costs about $3.5 million to remediate. So with kind of Active Directory, Microsoft has this more comprehensive identity and access management solution in the cloud. It's really kind of modern. As we showed in the graphic before, it spans both on-premise and in the cloud, but also provides those full scope of service and self-services, from identity management, device registration from mobile phones to laptops, to other types of things that you need to control, user provisioning, how you create users across all your applications at once, not individually, how you're gonna federate access to those applications, and also protecting your data. So with Azure Active Directory and moving that identity to the cloud, you have thousands of apps, right? You have all your apps from third-party providers, Salesforce, those types of things that you can use your Azure Active Directory for authentication against that. Not to mention your internal line of business applications and other third-party vendors. All of them work within the Active Directory scope using SAML, OpenID, or directly to Active Directory. This lets you enable business without borders. It allows you to have management across scale, and it's cloud-powered protection. So, having that information secured with the power of the cloud. To begin migrating Active Directory to the cloud, it's a pretty straightforward process. There's a lot of turnkey solutions out there. First, you take all your Active Directories and you use Active Directory Connect to start syncing those identities to the cloud. You don't need to sync the passwords or all the information, but enough to be able to provide authentication. And then you go to your other applications that are doing direct Active Directory queries and connections, whether they're using LDAP or other types of connections, update those. And then in addition to that, you kind of figure out, you can implement your other apps that are using SAML or OpenID authentication to make sure those are authenticated. It's as simple as that. Both Active Directories stay in sync, both Active Directories work.
One customer that comes to mind who did not do Active Directory correctly up front was one that had wound up through merger and acquisition with 3 different Active Directories and 3 different domains. And think about that. Their employees had 3 different email addresses. They didn't address the problem right away, and as they grew and hired more people, they would onboard those into haphazardly a different domain. And after 5 years, it really was a mess, and it took them a lot of time and effort to collapse those back down into one Active Directory domain. So think about that when you migrate to Azure as well. Might be an opportunity to clean up something that you've done in the past, but also to plan for the future. Maybe you will be doing merger and acquisitions and you want to be able to add companies or add employees easily and onboard those. So think about where you are and where you're going to go as well in doing your planning.
Some lessons learned when implementing Azure Active Directory is to create your identity reference architecture. How are systems going to authenticate against your Azure Directory? Internal applications and third-party applications. Look at your third-party applications where you have a separate identity store or users are creating their own credentials, within those applications. Figure out if you can use SAML or another OpenID format to authenticate against your Active Directory. This is powerful because you can provision and deprovision users for all these third-party applications when, employee gets promoted or moves on or those types of things or onboarded. You're not managing all these individual identity stores. When focusing on identity and modernizing your identity and using Azure Active Directory, involve the whole organization because identity impacts everybody. All these business leaders have their own rules and rights. There's different IT departments. Kind of create a board that makes sense to establish a strategy. And standardize on your roles and rights. Make sure that all business units are using the same types of, from a naming convention to the roles to the kind of permissions that are available. Those are standardized and they're easy to maintain and govern from there.